In this video, you will learn what in Vue are event binding, property binding, and two-way data binding. Hi, I'm Alexander.Kochergina from Monsterlessons Academy, where I am teaching you how to become a developer or improve your skills of being a developer in learning by doing way. And if you are new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I will link everything that I'm mentioning in the description box below. And just to remind you, this video is a part of free series Vue for Beginners. So let's jump right into it. So in previous video, we successfully rendered our list of users and styled it with our scoped styles. Now I want to talk about event binding and property binding. And we want, of course, to check it on the real example. So let's say that we want to remove each of our user. So we want here somewhere to render a button remove, and when we click on this button, we want to remove a record from our array. So let's check how we can do it. First of all, here we need to add our remove button. So we can write that this is span. It should not be actually button if we don't need to, and inside I want to write remove. Now the question is how we can make a click on this element. And normally in plain JavaScript you need to have event handler there, and you need to listen for this click and so on. Actually in Vue it is done in easier way. So here we want to say add click equals, and here will be remove user, and here we are passing inside user ID. So actually we did a lot of stuff. First of all, the question is what is this add click? Actually, the correct way to write it is v on, then colon and click. And this is the whole construction, how it is normally written in Vue. But nobody is writing like this because it is much easier here to write just add click. So this means that if we want to bind some event to our DOM elements, we are writing add and then the name of the event. And of course the most popular event for us is click. Now in the value of click, we are passing a function from our component which will be called. And this is a function remove user, and we will create it in a second. And of course here we need to pass some data inside, and our unique data for every user is the ID. So now we know inside remove user function what user we need to remove from the array. Now the question is how we can create a function inside our component. And for this we have a special property. So here I ended data, and after data we can create this special property. It is called methods. So all our functions inside component are living inside methods. So methods is an object, and here the key is our function. So here we want a function remove user, and we're getting ID as an argument. So let's write here console log remove user ID and check that this is working. Now when we see in browser our remove button on the right, actually this is because we wrote correct styles before, and now I'm clicking on remove user. You can see in console that we are getting this console log remove user and the number. So this is our ID. So once again, when we want to bind some element to our function, we simply write add, then the name of the event, and here is the function that we want to call, and inside we are passing parameters if we need to. So here now we have access to our ID, and we can simply change these users. So once again, what is this users? This is our array of users that we are rendering, and we can directly change it here. So what I want to do here is just filter our data. So we can write here this users filter, and actually we get access to every user, and we want to check that user ID does not equal ID that we want to remove. So this is nothing special here, it is just plain JavaScript. So we're filtering our array of objects, and we're removing the element with this ID. So at the end we are getting same users, but without this one element. Let's check in browser. We have 3 elements, we are clicking remove, and now we have only 2 elements. As you can see, it is super easy to bind events and to do something with our data inside these events. Now I want to add logic of adding a user to the array. So it would be nice here somewhere on the top to have a button and the input. So we can type there the new username and then click a button to add it. So let's do this now. First of all, I want to wrap everything in additional div. And now inside this div, we can move our loop. And before this loop, we can have an input and a button. So here will be input type text. Let's close this input. And now we have our button. And inside we will simply write add user. So let's check this was plain HTML, nothing special. So here is our input and add user. The question is how we can add information from our input inside our component. So basically we can write something, but it's not changing the component and we're not saving this value anywhere. So actually the idea is that we want to save this somewhere in the property inside our component and then use this information when we're clicking add user. Now we want to use here two-way data binding. What does it mean? We want to bind this input to some property inside our component. And then when we're changing the input, this property will be changed. And if we're changing the property, then the input will be updated automatically. And to do this, we need to write here an attribute vModel, and here will be some name that we need to create. So I want to name it new user name. Now, every time when this new username will be updated or the input, then this property will be updated. Now inside data, somewhere under the users, we can create this property new username, and by default it is empty string. Now let's check if it's working. So I will simply render here new username property and let's check in browser. As you can see, when I type something inside the input, you can see directly the value which I am rendering from our component. So this is exactly two-way data binding, which you can use just with the help of vModel. And this is exactly what we need. So now when we are typing something here, our property is being updated. And now we want, when we click on add user, to generate this new user. How we can do that? We need here on button to add an event click. So here we want to make add user, and this is a function, but we don't need to pass anything inside, because actually we have this property new username inside this, and we can use it directly. So for this we need to create add user method. And inside we want to generate somehow our new user. But the problem is that we have here unique IDs like 1, 2, 3. And we can't really just create new ID like length +1, because at the moment when we remove a user, IDs won't be correct. This means that we somehow need to generate our unique IDs. How we can do that? Just with some plain JavaScript. So for example, I can write math random, and I'm getting a random number. And actually we can make here toString, and we're getting a string number which can actually be our ID. But what I want to do is to set here 16, and then our number will look like this. So actually this is looking like nice unique ID for us. So let's use this construction in order to generate our unique ID for new user. So here is our unique ID, and we're just pasting here math random to string 16. Now we want to create our new user. And we know that this is an object, so it will look exactly like inside our array. So inside, first of all, we need an ID, and this is our unique ID. Then we need a name, and this will be our this new username. So this is this property which is inside our input. And the last one is age. Actually, we don't have an input for the age. You can build it later on your own if you want. So I will just paste here 30. Now all that we need to do is to update our array. So we can simply push new user inside these users. So this users push, and here will be new user. And in this case, we're adding new user to our array. So let's check if it's working. So here we have 3 users. I'm writing one more user. I'm clicking add user, and as you can see, this user is rendered. So what's happened? Here we had our input, we wrote here some text. Then our property was updated because this is vModel, which means two-way data binding. And now when we're clicking Add User, we're generating this unique ID and then this new user object. And then we simply put this new object inside our array, and this array is re-rendered because here on the top we have v-for loop for all our users. And in this case, our new user was added. So now you know two things. You know event binding. For event binding, we're just using add and the name. And you know vModel, which is two-way data binding. So just vModel and then the name of the property. And the last thing that I want to show you, I can't actually show you on the example because it's not the scope of our ticket here, but we can just create a plain URL and check how we can do property binding there. So let's say that we want to render some URL. So normally we will write here a href, and here will be some URL like google.com, actually with HTTP and 2 slashes. And now we're closing our A tag, and inside we're writing google.com. Now the question is how we can render this google.com from our property from Vue. Normally we want to store everything inside property, maybe generate it, maybe change later and so on, so we can't really use just plain string inside HTML. Of course we can, but the use case with variable is happening much more often. Which means actually we want here to move this string to the property. So let's create here a new property and name it URL, for example, and just paste here our string. So now we have URL as a variable. So normally we will get it in some component or change or generate, whatever. And now we want to render this URL inside our template here in href. And we can do this with the help of property binding. And what is property binding? This is colon and then the name of the attribute, for example, href. And now here we can throw inside our URL, and this is this URL. And actually you already saw this syntax here in the v-for loop when we passed here our key. So actually this was property binding. So to bind a property we need colon and then the name of the attribute. And normally we're using it with all default HTML attributes or with our components. So in this case v-for is actually not component by directive, but doesn't matter really. The point is that inside v-for we need to pass this attribute key. So let's check if it's working. As you can see in browser, here is our URL and the URL is correct, which means actually this is a variable and we rendered this variable from the component with the help of our property binding. In this video you learned really a lot of stuff. So now you know what is event binding and how to use it, property binding and two-way data binding. Just to not mix it, you just need to remember that for event binding, you simply write add, for property binding, you are writing colon, and for two-way data binding, you are writing vModel. This is it. And if Vue for Beginners course is too easy for you, you can always go and check my advanced Vue course, which is going 10 hours where we're creating real application from empty folder to the finished application. And I will give you a link in the description box below, as well to all my other courses. And if you like this video and you want more content like this, don't forget to put thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And I will see you in my next video.